Pressure changes people. When the future feels unclear, the heart wants quick relief. We want one strong move that makes everything calm again. But in Scripture, resilience often looks quieter. It looks like attention. It looks like restraint. It looks like stewardship when nobody is clapping. Joseph stands in a room where power can crush you. Pharaoh demands meaning from a dream, and the whole nation hangs on the interpretation. Joseph does not talk like a gambler. He does not sell confidence. He speaks with fear of God and with a plan that respects seasons, plenty and famine, expansion and tightening, work and waiting. The stakes are not just food. The stakes are trust. This is for education and spiritual reflection, not financial advice. Still, the pattern matters. Joseph's crisis budgeting begins long before the crisis shows up. It begins with honest forecasting, clear authority, and habits that can hold weight. Scripture does not present it as magic. It presents it as wisdom under God's providence. And wisdom often asks for action that feels boring. So as we step into the first strategy, notice the order. Joseph starts with measured collection, not panic hoarding. He starts with structure, not slogans. And he starts while the fields are still full, while the barns still smell like harvest, while people still assume tomorrow will feel like today. Collect 1/5 during plenty years. You feel it when things are good, and you still do not feel safe. More comes in, but more goes out. The temptation is to call it freedom, or to spend like the season will never change. Joseph begins with an uncomfortable move. He plans restraint in the middle of abundance. Joseph tells Pharaoh to appoint overseers and take 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 years of abundance. Genesis 41:34. Then he says that food should be gathered and stored for the years ahead. Genesis 41:35-36. The logic is simple and heavy. Plenty is not proof that famine will not come. Plenty is a test of whether you can prepare without fear. In the ancient world, 1/5 was not a cute suggestion. It was a serious portion. It required agreement, authority, and routine. The plan turns blessing into reserves, not just celebration. Today, people often twist this principle in two directions. First, fear-saving. A person piles cash with clenched hands not to serve anyone but to control life. Second, shortcut giving. Someone hears 1/5 and treats it like a spell, forcing a rigid rule without wisdom, then resenting God when stress stays. Two modern examples show the drift. One family upgrades every time a raise comes, then panics when a bill hits. One worker swings into extreme budgeting, cuts everything overnight, then quits after 2 weeks and calls discipline impossible. Biblically, restraint is not mistrust. It can be worship. Proverbs says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, while fools devour all they have." Proverbs chapter 21:20. Start small and steady. Step 1. Choose a percentage to set aside before spending, even if it is modest. Step 2. Name the purpose, like need buffer or future giving, so it serves love, not fear. Quiet preparation can be a form of obedience. Store grain under central authority. You can have a plan and still lose the moment to confusion. When pressure rises, everyone reaches for control. People argue. People blame. People grab what they can. Joseph's strategy recognizes a hard truth. In crisis, scattered authority often turns into scattered survival. Joseph says the grain should be stored under the authority of Pharaoh. The food is not left to private chance or local competition. It is guarded as a public reserve for the 7 years of famine. Later, when hunger spreads, the people cry to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh directs them to Joseph. Genesis chapter 41:55. Scripture shows a chain of command, not to glorify power, but to prevent chaos. Joseph is not acting as a lone hero. He is acting as a steward within assigned authority, and that structure keeps the storehouses from becoming a rumor or a free-for-all. In modern life, we often copy the form without the heart. We treat central authority as control and domination, or we reject any structure and call it freedom. Two examples are common. One household has 5 separate money plans, no shared categories, and constant conflict because nobody knows who decides. Another person keeps everything in their own hands, refuses counsel, and hides purchases, then calls it independence. Both paths can create secrecy, and secrecy usually increases financial stress. The biblical principle is simpler. Decide who holds the keys. Make it clear. For a family, that might mean one budget meeting and one shared system, with humility from both spouses. Ephesians chapter 5:21. For a person, it may mean submitting your plan to wise counsel, not random opinions, because plans fail for lack of counsel. Proverbs 15:22. Practical step 1. Pick one place where your reserve lives, one account or one envelope system. Practical step 2. Set one rule for access, like a waiting day or a joint agreement. Authority without humility can harm, but authority with clarity can protect. Distribute storage across cities. Most people do not think about distance until they are forced to. When things get tight, the weakest point might not be your income, it might be your logistics. The help exists, but it is too far away, too late, or too hard to reach. Joseph plans for that. During the years of abundance, Joseph collects food and stores it in the cities. Genesis chapter 41-48. In every city he lays up food from the fields around it, tying supply to local reality. Genesis 41-48. The result is abundance so large he stops keeping records because it is beyond measure. Genesis 41-49. The text is not teaching sloppy accounting. It is showing scale, and it is showing distribution. Joseph does not build one giant barn and hope the roads hold. He spreads storage, reducing transport strain, delay, and breakdown when famine hits. Modern distortion often shows up as one-point failure. People put all resilience in one place. One job, one client, one savings bucket with no access plan. Two examples are common. A person keeps an emergency fund but only in a hard-to-access investment, then uses a credit card when a real emergency comes. Or a family relies on one income stream with no backup skills, no side capacity, and no margin for illness. When trouble comes, the issue is not only the lack of resources, it is the lack of distribution. The deeper wisdom is stewardship with realism. Scripture praises preparation, but also teaches that wisdom looks ahead. Proverbs 27:12. Distribution is not only about money, it is also about relationships and skills. Practical step 1. Separate your reserves by purpose, like small emergencies and big disruptions, so you are not forced into one extreme decision. Practical step 2. Diversify your support system. One trusted mentor, one accountability friend, one practical contact who can help you think clearly. Comment what distributed storage could look like in your life. Build storehouses and create reserves. The hardest part of resilience is building what you hope you never need. It feels slow, it feels expensive, and it feels like you could be enjoying life instead. But Joseph's plan is not just saving, it is building capacity. Reserves need a container. Joseph's approach includes storing grain in cities and guarding it for the coming famine, Genesis chapter 41:35-36. Later, Scripture describes Joseph storing up grain like the sand of the sea, Genesis 41:49. Then the storehouses become a real system, something that can be opened when famine spreads, Genesis 41:56. A reserve is not only an amount, it is a structure. In Joseph's day, that meant physical storehouses, oversight, and protection. In our day, it may mean an emergency fund, a clear budget, and a disciplined rhythm that keeps the reserve from leaking away. Modern misuse often swings between fantasy and neglect. Fantasy says, "I will build a reserve later," as if later is guaranteed. Neglect says, "I tried once, it did not work, so I am not that kind of person." Two examples show the pattern. Someone starts saving but never creates categories, so every surprise wipes out the fund and they call it pointless. Someone else keeps a reserve but treats it like extra spending money, draining it for wants, then feeling ashamed when real need hits. Scripture's wisdom is patient and grounded. The point is not anxiety. The point is diligence. And in the Joseph story, the reserve is built under responsibility, not impulse. It is built before the hunger. That timing matters. 2. Beginner steps can help. First, define what counts as an emergency in writing, so the reserve is not decided by mood. Second, create a small maintenance habit, like weekly review and monthly contribution, so the storehouse keeps being rebuilt after it is used. Reserves are not a trophy. They are a tool for faithful stewardship under God's care. Open storehouses only when crisis hits. Most people empty their options too early. The pressure starts, the headlines feel loud, and suddenly every just in case becomes right now. The account meant for emergencies becomes a normal account. The pantry meant for disruption becomes a snack cabinet. Joseph shows a different kind of restraint. He waits, and he watches the season shift fully before he unlocks what was stored. When the famine bites, the people cry out, and Pharaoh sends them to Joseph. Genesis chapter 41:55. Then Scripture says, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians because the famine was severe. Genesis 41:56. The timing matters. The storehouses are not opened as a display of power. They are opened as a response to confirmed need. And Joseph does not scatter the reserves in one emotional moment. He releases provision with structure at the point it becomes necessary, not merely when it feels uncomfortable. The Bible often holds this tension. Preparation is praised and patience is required. Proverbs warns that wisdom sees danger and hides, while the simple keep going and suffer. Proverbs 27:12. But patience is also a kind of faith. Joseph does not rush the storehouse door open to soothe anxiety. He preserves the reserve so it can actually last through the full weight of famine. Today, this principle gets misused in two common ways. First, early rating. A person starts a reserve, then uses it for a vacation, a phone upgrade, or deserved treats. Second, early panic deployment. A family sells long-term assets at the first sign of stress, then later faces a true emergency with fewer tools. Two examples. Someone uses their emergency fund for a birthday party and tells themselves it is community. Someone cancels all insurance and safeguards to free cash fast, then pays more later when the unexpected arrives. The theological grounding is stewardship under God, not comfort under control. Beginner steps. Define clear triggers for using reserves, like job loss, medical need, or essential repairs. Then practice a pause, even a single day, before pulling from it, so urgency does not become habit. Reserves are not there to make you feel rich. They are there to help you endure with integrity. Sell from reserves to control. Runaway shortages. When resources get scarce, people can turn into rumors with legs. One neighbor says supplies are running out. Another says prices will explode. Fear spreads faster than hunger. In that moment, generosity without structure can collapse, and structure without compassion can harden. Joseph's pattern lands in the middle. He sells from reserves, not because he loves money, but because he is managing demand so the nation does not tear itself apart. Scripture says Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians during severe famine. It also says all the world came to Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe everywhere. Genesis chapter 41:57. That detail hints at pressure beyond Egypt's borders. Selling creates a measured flow. It limits hoarding, discourages reckless grabbing, and helps the reserve serve more people over time. It is not presented as perfect economics. It is presented as a functioning crisis policy under authority and scarcity. We see a related wisdom thread elsewhere. Proverbs warns that whoever withholds grain will be cursed, but blessing comes on the one who sells it. The proverb is not praising price gouging. It is showing that controlled release of essentials can be a public good when scarcity is real. Joseph's action also avoids a subtle trap. If everything is free with no boundaries, the strongest and fastest may take the most, leaving the weak behind. Modern distortion tends to go extreme. First, fear-based hoarding and price spikes. Someone buys far more than they need, then sells at a cruel markup. Second, performative generosity with no plan. Someone gives away their entire buffer in one emotional week, then becomes dependent and resentful. Two examples. A person stockpiles essentials and posts about it, fueling panic. A family overgives to prove faith, then uses debt to cover basics and calls it sacrifice. Theologically, this is about justice and stewardship. Beginners can try 2 steps. 1. Set a slow release rule for your own reserves, like taking only what is needed for the next short period. 2. Pair structure with mercy. Help someone intentionally, but decide the amount ahead of time. Comment where you have seen fear create shortages. Exchange. Resources and stages to preserve national stability. There is a moment when the usual tools stop working. People do not just run out of food. They run out of the ways they normally pay. When that happens, a society can either descend into violence or move into hard, organized trade-offs. Joseph's stage-by-stage exchanges are not pretty, but they are an attempt to keep people alive while keeping a collapsing economy from turning into chaos. Genesis describes the famine growing so severe that money fails first, then livestock, then land. When money is gone, the Egyptians come to Joseph and ask for food, and Joseph takes livestock in exchange for bread. Genesis 47:15-17. After that, the people offer their land and themselves as servants to Pharaoh for food and seed, and Joseph buys the land for Pharaoh. Genesis chapter 47:19-20. The text shows staged exchange. It is not a single, sudden confiscation. It is a sequence tied to worsening conditions. This is also why the Joseph story should be handled carefully in finance teaching. Some readers praise the policy as wise administration. Others criticize it as building state power at the people's expense. Joseph is still a man operating inside a pagan empire, under Pharaoh's authority, trying to prevent mass death. It is wisdom inside a broken world, not a clean fairy tale. Modern misuse shows up when people copy the harshness without the context. 2 examples. A lender pushes someone into worse terms each time they struggle, then calls it just business. Or a person refuses any honest downsizing, clings to a lifestyle, then is forced into desperate trade-offs later. Stage-by-stage exchange in Scripture is not an excuse for exploitation. It is a warning that emergencies shrink choices. The better takeaway is humility and early action. Beginner steps. Identify what assets you would protect last, like housing stability and basic transportation. Then build a small plan for what you would sell first if needed, so you are not deciding while panicked. A crisis may not remove responsibility, but it can clarify what matters most. Set a sustainable ongoing fifth as the post-crisis system. After a storm, people want to sprint back to normal, but normal might be what made you fragile. Joseph does not treat the famine like a one-time story with a neat ending. He builds a continuing system, a predictable rhythm, so the land can produce, the people can live, and the nation can function without constant improvising. Genesis says Joseph gave seed to the people and set a policy for the harvest. They would give a fifth to Pharaoh and keep 4/5 for seed and food. Genesis 47:23-24. Then Scripture says Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, that Pharaoh should have the fifth, with an exception for the priest's land. Genesis 47:26. That is not a temporary, that is not a emergency measure. It is an ongoing rule. It stabilizes expectations. It reduces uncertainty. It also shows that recovery is not only about relief, it is about systems that continue after the adrenaline fades. This connects back to the earlier 1/5 in Genesis 41. In plenty, a fifth is collected for storage, Genesis chapter 41:34. After devastation, a fifth becomes a predictable structure for the future, Genesis 47:26. Again, be careful. This is a state policy under Pharaoh, not a direct command for every household today. The wisdom is in the pattern. Sustainable rhythm beats constant reaction. Modern distortion takes 2 paths. First, rebound spending. A person survives a hard season, then immediately upgrades everything to make up for it, rebuilding fragility. Second, permanent emergency mode. A person keeps living as if disaster is always one day away, never resting, never giving, never enjoying God's provision. 2 examples. Someone clears debt, then starts new debt for Status. Someone rebuilds savings but becomes controlling and fearful, treating every expense as betrayal. The theological ground is stewardship with gratitude. Beginners can try. Set one simple, ongoing percentage habit, giving, saving, or debt paydown, and keep it boring. Then schedule one regular review so you adjust with wisdom, not mood. A stable rhythm may not remove hardship, but it can help you meet it with a steadier heart. Some people hear Joseph and think the point is control, build reserves, set rules, outsmart the famine. But the Joseph story carries a quieter weight. Is the same man trusted with a national plan, and when he looks back, he does not credit his own force. He says evil was real, and God still intended good, to keep many people alive. That is not a promise that every plan works. It is a confession that God can work inside real disorder. So resilience starts in the heart. It starts with reverence. It starts with refusing the lie that money is a God who saves or a devil who ruins. Wisdom stores up because wisdom is humble. Proverbs chapter 21:20. Wisdom also takes refuge when danger is seen. Joseph's pattern is not about becoming untouchable. It is about becoming responsible. If these strategies touched something sensitive, that may be the point. They ask us to trade impulse for rhythm. They ask us to trade panic for prayerful planning. A beginner does not need a perfect system. Start with one clear category for a reserve and one clear rule for when to use it. Then practice one small act of stewardship that feels almost too simple, like reviewing your spending with honesty or choosing one percentage to set aside before you enjoy the rest. Over time, habits can shape character, and character often shapes choices. In a world where fear markets itself loudly, a steady soul becomes a quiet testimony. If you like our content, consider subscribing, or if some topics did not make this list, or there are topics you want us to feature, please leave them in the comments. What kind of faithfulness would it look like for you to prepare without becoming afraid?